The black sedan pulled up without warning. Seconds later, two strangers were demanding to see our kids, accusing us of neglect, threatening to tear our family apart. Across the street, our HOA president stood smiling, arms crossed like she was watching a show, but what happened next would shatter her world forever. First, let's go back to the beginning. The knock that changed everything. It was a Thursday like any other. I'd just finished mowing the lawn, shirt damp with sweat, when a black sedan rolled up to the curb. No markings, tinted windows, the kind of vehicle that makes your stomach tighten. Two people stepped out, a man and a woman, mid-30s, stiff posture, clipboards in hand. They introduced themselves as agents from Child Protective Services. No small talk, no smiles, just a direct professional tone as they asked to see our children. Immediately. I called out to my wife, Laura. She came to the door without hesitation, already sensing something was wrong. 36 years old, laser-focused, always in control. Her black hair pulled tight in a ponytail, eyes sharp and unreadable. She didn't argue. She opened the door wider and told them to come in. They walked through the house, eyes scanning everything, the floors, the kitchen, the kids' rooms, even the backyard. My pulse was hammering. The kids were home, playing Minecraft upstairs, totally unaware. I could hear them laughing, innocent, oblivious, while two strangers in business attire inspected the life we'd built. Then came the accusations. Neglect, unsafe living conditions, suspected emotional harm. It hit like a punch to the chest. Lies. All of it. Fabricated nonsense from someone with a motive. And just as those words settled in, I saw her, across the street, arms folded like a proud warden watching an execution. Cynthia Wells, HOA board queen, late 50s, bleached curls, pastel blouse ironed to perfection, gold badge swinging from her neck like a sheriff in a western. She stood on her perfectly trimmed lawn with a smug little smile playing on her lips, watching. And suddenly it clicked. This wasn't random. This wasn't a mistake. It was calculated. Every HOA fine she'd thrown our way, the unauthorized treehouse, the slightly too tall grass, the complaint about our kids' sidewalk chalk being graffiti, it was all leading here. We'd fought back on every front. And Laura didn't just win those fights. She embarrassed her. She shredded Cynthia's amateur legal threats with real legal precision. Laura didn't just know the law. She was the law. Because what Cynthia didn't know, what she never thought to check, was that my wife wasn't just some suburban mom with a sharp tongue. She was the district attorney for the entire county. And someone had just tried to take her children away. Karen's game. That night, after we put the kids to bed, we sat at the kitchen table in silence, piecing it all together like a crime scene. Cynthia Wells had been building to this for months, maybe longer. Every HOA notice now looked like a stepping stone. The tall grass citation, the noise complaints, the letters about our trampoline, the constant threats of fines over irrelevant nonsense. It hadn't stopped when we removed the treehouse or installed the exact brand of fencing the board demanded, because it was never about rules, it was about control. Cynthia expected submission, but we didn't play along, and Laura especially didn't. Every time Cynthia sent some condescending HOA letter filled with legal buzzwords she barely understood, Laura responded with real legalese, not threats. Facts, statutes, case law. Cynthia didn't know she was going up against the district attorney when she started this, but she knew one thing for sure. She was losing. So she escalated. She went from badgering us with HOA fines to leveraging the one threat no parent can ignore, the threat of losing their children. It was the most vicious move possible, and it told us everything we needed to know about what kind of person we were dealing with. She'd filed an anonymous CPS report, which wasn't just petty, it was dangerous. She had accused us of child neglect, of putting our kids in harm's way, of endangering them, with no evidence, no merit, just hate. And the part that chilled me wasn't just the lie. It was the thought she enjoyed doing it. I remembered the look on her face that afternoon, standing across the street with that smug smile, knowing what she had set in motion, knowing the damage it could cause. But she had made one massive mistake. She underestimated Laura. Cynthia assumed she was just another suburban mom too busy juggling work and family to fight back. But Laura didn't panic. She analyzed. She moved like a surgeon, efficient, cold, lethal. She knew exactly which strings to pull. She knew how to make a false report unravel and how to prove malicious intent in a court of law. And more importantly, she wasn't out for an apology. She wanted precedent. She wanted to bury Cynthia so deep in legal consequences that no one in this town, or any other HOA queen drunk on power, would ever try this again. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. And Laura wasn't angry. She was focused. And that's when I knew. Cynthia thought she'd won. But she had just started a war with the wrong woman. A legal trap is set. By sunrise, Laura was already in motion. She didn't sleep. She didn't need to. While I tried to wrap my head around the emotional fallout, she went into prosecutor mode. All logic, all precision. First, she filed a FOIA request targeting every CPS complaint tied to our home. Not a blanket search, a laser-focused probe. Within hours, the reports came back, and the entire scheme unraveled. There were multiple complaints, all recent, all anonymous, all carefully timed to coincide with HOA disputes we'd had with Cynthia. The language in the complaints mimicked legal jargon, poorly. Laura spotted it instantly, a fake professionalism used to disguise something deeply personal. Then came the so-called evidence, photos included in the report. At first glance, they showed overflowing trash bins, rotting food, broken toys, what looked like a dangerous yard. But the metadata told a different story. Timestamps were forged. File names were inconsistent. GPS data placed the photos on a street blocks away from our actual home. Angles didn't match. Focal lengths were inconsistent. Whoever staged the photos didn't know the basics of digital forensics. Laura did. She cross-referenced IP addresses tied to the anonymous complaints. She didn't need a warrant. The sender had been careless, using a personal email routed through a local provider without masking the headers. One trace route later, and the signal came back to a single address: Cynthia Wells, HOA president, self-appointed guardian of suburban order. That's when Laura stopped being a mother defending her family and became a prosecutor building a case. And she didn't go small. She didn't aim for a slap on the wrist. She opened a war chest of charges: conspiracy to file a false report, falsification of evidence, perjury by proxy, harassment, defamation, abuse of government resources, each one serious. Combined, devastating. She started contacting CPS directly, not just as a mother, but as the district attorney. Officers who had visited our home were more than willing to testify. They had found no issues, no red flags, nothing even remotely concerning. But they had flagged the anonymous report as unusually aggressive. That phrasing mattered. It established a pattern, a weaponized system. Laura compiled a timeline. Every HOA fine, every CPS call, every email Cynthia had sent to the board complaining about us. She sent legal notices to the HOA demanding all internal communication referencing our name. And they folded. Fast. Board members leaked entire threads. Emails from Cynthia ranting about our lack of compliance, accusing us of undermining the community, even mocking our children. Screenshots showed her bragging about how nothing scares parents like CPS. Laura printed every word. It wasn't enough to prove motive. She had proof of premeditation. proof that Cynthia used a government agency as a personal tool of intimidation, a felony in our state. Laura began drafting a case that didn't just defend us. It indicted Cynthia as a malicious actor, someone who abused her limited HOA power and crossed the line into criminal behavior. And still, she never raised her voice, never made a public scene, never confronted Cynthia face to face. She let the paperwork do the talking. Quiet, strategic, ruthless. 3 days after the FOIA came in, Laura submitted her final packet of evidence to the sheriff's office. 147 pages, cross-indexed and annotated. She included signed witness statements from other neighbors who had also been targeted by Cynthia's selective enforcement. She documented the CPS agent's own testimony that the home was safe, the kids were fine, and the complaint reeked of personal vendetta. By the time she was done, Cynthia wasn't just guilty of being a neighborhood nuisance. She was staring down felony charges, stacked and airtight. And Laura? She wasn't finished. She was just getting started. The confrontation. On the 4th morning, before the sun had fully burned off the mist clinging to the neighborhood streets, 2 sheriff's cruisers pulled up outside Cynthia Wells's pristine colonial. The blue and red lights flickered silently, painting her perfect white siding in pulses of color. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, pretending to trim the hedge, heart pounding harder with every passing second. The deputies approached her door in full uniform, badges gleaming, paperwork clutched in one gloved hand. They didn't hesitate. They knocked hard, 3 times, loud enough for the entire cul-de-sac to hear. Cynthia answered quickly, dressed exactly how you'd expect. Pastel blouse, pressed slacks, oversized pearls, every inch manicured suburban royalty. She smiled when she opened the door, the kind of polished, performative smile you wear for HOA meetings and bake sales. But that smile faltered the instant the deputy spoke. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught the important ones. "You are under arrest." I caught the flash of metal as they produced the warrant. I caught the disbelief cracking across her face. For a moment, Cynthia tried to protest. Her mouth moved, hands gestured weakly. But the deputies didn't care. They read her rights with clinical detachment, turned her around, and cuffed her wrists in full view of half the neighborhood. Phones came out instantly, curtains twitched open, mothers pulling strollers froze on the sidewalk. The queen of the HOA, the self-appointed enforcer of community standards, was marched down her own immaculate walkway like a common criminal. I watched every second. No shouting, no dramatic struggle, just the slow, humiliating realization bleeding down her face, the way her eyes darted around, seeing every neighbor she had once lorded over now recording her downfall. Her stiff posture crumbled as she was placed in the back of the cruiser, the door shutting with a solid finality that seemed to echo down the street. The news spread like wildfire. Before noon, the entire block knew. Before dinner, the wider subdivision knew. No official statement had been made yet, but screenshots of the arrest were already circulating, whispers blooming like weeds through group chats and Facebook pages. The mighty had fallen, and no one was rushing to her defense. Inside our home, Laura remained calm. She filed the next wave of paperwork as if it were any other Thursday chore. She called CPS to confirm the case against us had been formally closed, ruled unfounded in every possible category. Then she turned her focus back to Cynthia, filing supplemental charges, not for vengeance, for completeness, because it wasn't enough that Cynthia was arrested. She had to be dismantled legally, methodically, irreversibly, until there was nothing left of the petty little empire she had built out of fear and intimidation. And as I watched the last flicker of Cynthia's old life disappear behind the tinted windows of that cruiser, I realized something. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It didn't come with screaming matches or fistfights in the street. Real justice was cold, inevitable, and utterly without mercy, and Laura was its perfect executioner. Karen's last stand. Cynthia posted bail before sunset. Money wasn't her problem. Pride was. She came back to the neighborhood like nothing had happened. Chin high, fake smile frozen in place, parading around as if handcuffs and flashing lights weren't burned into everyone's memory. But the mask barely held. Beneath the designer sunglasses and over-applied makeup, the cracks were spreading. Fast. She hired lawyers, not one, but a small army of them, big names from downtown, expensive suits who specialized in spinning public narratives and poking holes in cases. She screamed retaliation to anyone who would listen. She tried to paint herself as a martyr, a brave citizen standing up for community safety. She flooded local forums with posts about corrupt officials and targeted families. She even managed an interview with a small-time blog, clutching a tissue and speaking about her fear for the neighborhood's future. But none of it mattered. The evidence Laura had assembled wasn't circumstantial or emotional. It was clinical. Metadata from the fake photos Cynthia submitted was dissected by forensic analysts, proving they were tampered with. The timestamps on her staged trash piles didn't match security camera footage from other homes on the block. CPS agents testified under oath that the anonymous complaints originated from Cynthia's own IP address, pinged from inside her home. Neighbors she once terrorized lined up to give statements, some gleefully, others with quiet satisfaction. And then came the emails. Hundreds of them, pulled from HOA servers, spilled into public record. Bitter rants, detailed plans to force compliance, gleeful predictions about how badly CPS could scare them. Her words weren't the desperate cries of a concerned neighbor. They were the cold calculations of someone playing God with people's lives. Her own arrogance became the rope she used to hang herself. In court, Cynthia looked smaller than she ever had. A brittle woman in expensive clothes, hiding behind a team of lawyers who couldn't erase the paper trail she had left behind. No amount of pearl clutching could change the facts. No performance could erase the cold, methodical pattern of harassment Laura had exposed to the world. And for the first time in her life, Cynthia Wells wasn't the one setting the rules. She was just another name on the docket, and her fall was only just beginning. The courtroom reckoning. The courthouse buzzed like a kicked hive. Reporters loitered outside the main doors, cameras slung over shoulders, microphones ready. Neighbors packed the public gallery, murmuring among themselves, clutching takeaway coffees, exchanging gossip behind cupped hands. It wasn't just a trial anymore. It was the neighborhood's main event, the fall of Cynthia Wells, broadcast live in real time. She entered flanked by her attorneys, trying to project an image of dignity. Her makeup was heavier than usual, thick enough to mask the fear creeping into her expression. She wore a pale blue dress, conservative, calculated to make her look small and harmless. But no outfit could erase the months of harassment, the stacks of evidence, the mountain of digital footprints she had left behind. Laura sat across the aisle, calm and immovable. She didn't grandstand. She didn't posture. She presented the case like a slow, merciless drumbeat. Dates, times, documents, witness statements, metadata analyses, CPS testimony. Every fact layered on top of the last, building an airtight fortress around Cynthia's guilt. No emotion, no wasted words, just precision. Cynthia's lawyers tried everything, claiming miscommunication, accusing Laura of vendetta, painting Cynthia as a concerned citizen overwhelmed by civic duty. But every argument collapsed under the weight of cold evidence. Every defense evaporated when Cynthia's own emails were read aloud, sentence by damning sentence, dripping with malice and entitlement. When Laura called the CPS investigators to the stand, it was the final nail. They testified that the reports were not only baseless but unusually aggressive, filed repeatedly from the same source. One investigator even admitted they had internally flagged the complaints as harassment. The jury barely needed time to deliberate. The verdict hit the courtroom like a hammer. guilty on all major charges. Cynthia didn't shout. She didn't argue. She just crumpled inward, folding into herself like a paper doll soaked in rain, her carefully constructed persona dissolving under the fluorescent lights. Her hands shook. Her shoulders heaved. She sobbed into her expensive silk sleeves while flashbulbs popped from the back of the room. At sentencing, the judge was brutal, but surgical. 5 years probation, a $50,000 fine, a permanent ban from serving in any HOA leadership or community governing role. A personal restraining order preventing her from coming within 500 feet of my family or our home. No wiggle room, no second chances. When it was over, she was led from the courtroom in tears, clutching a crumpled tissue, the cameras waiting outside catching every broken step. Cynthia Wells, the once feared queen of the HOA, was now nothing more than a cautionary tale. And Laura? Laura didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. She simply gathered her files, kissed me on the cheek, and walked out the front doors into the sun, calm, proud, and utterly undefeated. The aftershocks. The fallout started almost immediately. Within a month, the HOA board, once Cynthia's personal kingdom, began to unravel. Without her iron grip, meetings devolved into chaos. Half the board members resigned in disgrace, unable or unwilling to defend the petty tyrannies they'd once enforced. Lawsuits from other residents she had harassed started piling up like dead leaves after a storm. Old grievances resurfaced, fines, threats, wrongful citations, all dragged into the light. Insurance premiums for the HOA skyrocketed as legal battles mounted, the association hemorrhaging money and credibility with every new court date. The property values Cynthia had so proudly bragged about protecting began to nosedive. Realtors whispered warnings to prospective buyers. Longtime residents listed their homes at cut rates just to get out. The HOA, once her symbol of power, became a financial anchor dragging the whole neighborhood down. No one mourned its collapse. No farewell parties. No quiet gratitude. Just silence and a deep, collective exhale as Cynthia's reign officially rotted away. Meanwhile, our lives snapped back into place with a kind of surreal smoothness. CPS visits stopped completely. No more anonymous phone calls. No more strangers inspecting our home or interrogating our children. The surveillance Cynthia had normalized, the suspicious glances from neighbors, the lingering cars parked too long at the curb, vanished overnight. The street felt lighter. The air felt cleaner. For the first time in years, the kids could ride their bikes, draw chalk murals, set up lemonade stands, without feeling watched or judged. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now smiled and waved. Some stopped by to apologize, not in words but in small acts. Offers to mow the lawn while I was traveling, plates of cookies left anonymously on the porch. The neighborhood began to stitch itself back together, tentatively at first, then stronger, without fear, without Cynthia's shadow. And through it all, Laura never changed. She didn't brag about the victory. She didn't hold it over anyone's head. She moved on quietly, letting the results speak for themselves. Our house became a fortress of normalcy again, not through high walls or security systems, but through something Cynthia could never manufacture. Real peace. The battle was over. The enemy defeated. The life we fought for, ordinary, boring, beautiful, was finally undeniably ours again. Final justice. 6 months later, the world had settled into a rhythm so normal it almost felt strange. No flashing lights, no court summons, no whispers on the sidewalks, just school runs, weekend barbecues, quiet evenings watching the kids chase each other across the yard. And then, one afternoon, walking home from school with my son Ben, 8 years old, backpack bouncing, chatter non-stop about a science project, it happened. He tugged on my hand and pointed across the street. There she was, Cynthia Wells. No pearls. No polished mask. Just a hunched woman in faded jeans and a sun-bleached t-shirt, tugging stubborn weeds from the cracks in her neglected sidewalk. No one stood beside her. No friends offering help. No board members taking orders. She moved slowly, her motions mechanical, shoulders slumped like the weight of the world was still strapped to her back. Passers-by didn't stop. Some didn't even glance her way. She had become invisible, a relic no one missed. Ben squeezed my hand tighter. "Daddy, is that the mean lady?" he asked, his voice innocent, not cruel. I nodded. He studied her for a long moment, his small brow furrowed like he was solving a problem too big for words. Then he shrugged, swinging his backpack higher onto his shoulders. "She's not scary anymore," he said simply. And just like that, the final weight lifted. It wasn't the court rulings or the restraining orders that ended Cynthia's reign. It wasn't the financial penalties or the public humiliation. It was this. A child's shrug. A dismissal so effortless it erased her completely. Fear thrives on power, on the belief that the villain is bigger, stronger, untouchable. But standing there, watching her scrape at the weeds in silence, she looked so small, so broken that even the memory of fear crumbled. She was no monster, just a bitter, lonely woman who lost everything because she couldn't understand the one truth Laura had proven beyond all doubt. When you try to destroy good people, you don't just lose the fight. You lose yourself. We walked home, hand in hand, the sun warm on our backs, the house waiting for us. Safe, strong, and finally, completely ours. Forever.